stage for the session, The Sacred Feminine. May I invite Arundhati Subramaniam, Alka Pande and Malashri Lal on stage. And may I request the boys to get another chair? Okay. So we are delighted to introduce the Sacred Feminine. This session is presented by Department of Women and Child Development. Shakti is divine energy, all-powerful, and in its essence, feminine. Where there is divinity, there is feminine. Award-winning author and poet Arundhati Subramaniam's remarkable book, Women Who Were Only Themselves, Conversation with Four Travelers on Sacred Journey, depicts the spiritual journey of four extraordinary women. Alka Pande has worked extensively in the field of gender, identity, sexuality, and the traditional arts. Her latest book, Shakti, 51 Sacred Peethas of Goddesses devoted to understanding the Supreme Shakti and her sacred abodes. Malashri Lal has defining books on literature, on women, gender, and the interpretation and manifestation of the feminine. So Malashri Lal will be moderating the session. And now I invite our Honorable Minister, Shrimati Mamta Bhupesh Bhairavaji on stage, on the podium, to say a few words about our first session on the Sacred Feminine.
It's okay. Good morning, all of you. It's a very wonderful day, और मेरे लिए this is also a very great day for me कि मैं literature festival के अंदर इतने सालों में आ नहीं पाई, और आज आप लोगों ने मुझे invite करके जो honor दिया है उसके लिए मैं सब लोगों को बहुत बहुत thanks कहना चाहती हूँ. System के जो भी JLF के हमारे lead करने वाली पूरी यूनिट है उसको बहुत बहुत मेरी तरफ से थैंक्स. और मुझे खुशी है कि ये कार्यक्रम 2022 के अंदर पिछले 2 वर्षों के अंदर हो नहीं पाया कोविड की वजह से. ये प्रोग्राम जो जयपुर के अंदर एक अपने आप में बहुत हिस्टोरिकल प्रोग्राम रहता था और बहुत फेमस प्रोग्राम रहता है, और मैं समझती हूँ पूरे वर्ल्ड वाइड अगर हम इसकी बात करें तो JLF की चर्चा पूरी दुनिया, देश विदेश के अंदर होती है. हमारे लिए बहुत ही सौभाग्य का और राजस्थान और जयपुर के लिए बहुत खुशी की बात है कि JLF को हम लोग ऑनर कर पाते हैं यहाँ पे. साथियों, पिछले दशक की अगर 10 वर्षों की अगर हम बात करें तो JLF में लगभग 2000 ऐसे स्पीकर्स आए जिन्होंने पूरी भारत के बारे में, पूरी दुनिया के बारे में चर्चा की, और उनका जो रिजल्ट निकला वो लिटरेचर जगत के लिए बहुत माइलस्टोन बना, बहुत मील का पत्थर बन पाया. यहाँ जो डिस्कशंस हुए, जो पैनलिस्ट आए जिन्होंने अपने अपने व्यूज आपस में शेयर किए, इन गति को किस तरह से आगे बढ़ाना है, इन सब चीजों के बारे में जो चर्चा की वो मैं समझती हूँ अपने आप में बहुत महत्वपूर्ण रही है. और ये जो सेशन 2022 का आप लोगों ने ये ऑर्गेनाइज किया है, ये भी अपने आप में एक माइलस्टोन बनेगा. ऐसी मैं शुभकामनाएं, विशेष आप लोगों को देना चाहती हूँ. मुझे विश्वास है कि आज का ये सत्र जो हमारी महिला सशक्तिकरण के लिए और बेटियों के प्रति सम्मान और समाज में सकारात्मक वातावरण बनाने के लिए हम लोग ये सेशन कर रहे हैं. निश्चित तौर पे जरूरी है आज बुद्धिजीवी वर्गों को इन सब चीजों के बारे में चर्चा करनी, क्योंकि आज देश दुनिया कहाँ पहुंच चुकी है, कौन सी जगत के अंदर हम लोग बात करते हैं. चांद पे जाने की हम चर्चा करते हैं, और एक तरफ अगर हम लोग ये सोचे कि हमें घूंघट निकालना है, बेटियों को पढ़ाना नहीं है, उनको वापस दबा के रखना है, बेटा बेटी के अंदर अंतर रखना है, तो इन सब चीजों के लिए हमें बहुत गहनता से, बहुत गहराई से चर्चा करने की आवश्यकता है। इसलिए मैं समझती हूँ कि ये जो सेशन हमारा आज का है, इसका रिजल्ट फ्रूटफुल रहेगा। कहीं ना कहीं ऐसी थॉट्स हमारे आएंगे जो हम सब लोगों के लाइफ को बहुत चेंज करेंगे, और वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट के इस मुद्दे को हम लोग बहुत ही और भी अच्छे तरीके से, हमारे पैनलिस्ट जो बैठे हुए हैं ये अपने आप में शख्सियत है, मैं इनका भी जयपुर के अंदर वेलकम करना चाहूंगी। और मुझे पूरी उम्मीद है कि इनकी मेहनत और इनके विचारों के माध्यम से कहीं ना कहीं जेएलएफ को एक नई उड़ान मिलेगी, जेएलएफ को एक आगे बढ़ने का बहुत स्ट्रांगली मौका मिलेगा। ऐसी मैं भावनाएं, उम्मीद आप सब लोगों से करना चाहती हूँ। बेटी बचाओ बेटी पढ़ाओ को समर्पित जो ये हमारा आज का सेशन है, जो थीम चल रही है, आज के इस युग में जहां हम लोग इतने एडवांस बातें करते हैं, इतने आगे बढ़ने की बातें करते हैं, इसमें कहीं ना कहीं हमारे दिल में आज भी बेटा बेटी के लिए एक भेदभाव की भावना हमारे समाज के अंदर, सोसाइटी के अंदर दबी जबान से रहती है। तो हमें जरूरत है कि इस तरह के इंटरनेशनल लेवल के जो फेयर्स लग रहे हैं, जो डिस्कशन पॉइंट्स हो रहे हैं, उनमें कहीं ना कहीं हमें इन मुद्दों को उठाना चाहिए। और बेटी बचाओ बेटी पढ़ाओ की थीम तो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है, लेकिन हमारे घर में जब बेटी जन्म लेती है तो उसी दिन से हम लोग सोचने लग जाएं कि इस बेटी को हमें किस तरह से फ्रंट पर लाइन में लेकर आना है, किस तरह से इसको फ्लाई एक तरह से उड़ने का पूरा मौका देना है, और उन मुकामों तक पहुंचने की इसको सहयोग देना है जिस मुकाम तक ये पहुंचना चाहती है। हम अपनी बच्ची को हमेशा पढ़ने के लिए प्रेरित करने लग जाते हैं। कई बच्चों के अंदर बहुत खूबियां होती हैं, कोई कल्चरल एक्टिविटी के अंदर अपने आप को बहुत श्रेष्ठ अच्छा बनाना चाहता है, कोई आर्ट एंड कल्चर के अंदर जाना आता है, किसी को डिजाइनिंग का शौक है, किसी को एक्टिंग का शौक है, किसी को स्पोर्ट्स का शौक है। तो हमें बचपन से अपनी बच्चियों के बारे में अगर हम लोग ये सोचने लग जाएं कि हमारी बच्ची के अंदर हुनर क्या है, और उस हुनर की तरफ हम आगे बढ़े, तो निश्चित तौर पे हमें लगेगा कि हमारी बेटियां बहुत आगे बढ़ रही हैं। आज जरूरत है हमें बेटा बेटी के भेदभाव में जो जेंडर इक्वलिटी की समस्या भी हमारे बीच में। मुझे खुशी है बताते हुए, क्योंकि ये इंटरनेशनल प्लेटफॉर्म है, कि राजस्थान जहां पे पहले 848 के ऊपर था 1000 लड़कों के ऊपर, आज हम लोग 946 के ऊपर ही पहुंच चुके हैं। हमारा जो सेंसेक्स आंकड़ा है, तो ये अपने आप में कहीं ना कहीं अवेयरनेस का काम है। हम सब लोगों ने मिलकर कोशिश की है कि हम जेंडर इक्वलिटी को बराबर करें, लड़का लड़की के भेदभाव को दूर करने की कोशिश करें, और सोसाइटी के अंदर एक ही नजर से दोनों को, एक ही दृष्टिकोण से दोनों को देखने की हम लोग कोशिश करें। मैं जिस डिपार्टमेंट, वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट डिपार्टमेंट, चाइल्ड राइट्स डिपार्टमेंट मेरे पास में है, और राजस्थान जहां पे पहले घूंघट प्रथा, दहेज की प्रथाएं, बाल विवाह, इस तरह की चीजों के लिए बदनाम था, आज पिछले 3-4 दिन पहले अखबार के अंदर एक सेंसेक्स आया पूरे इंडिया का, और उसके अंदर राजस्थान जहां पहले 25-26 नंबर पे आता था कि यहाँ जागरूकता कम है, अवेयरनेस कम है, गर्ल्स की एजुकेशन का लेवल कम है, चाइल्ड मैरिज हो रही है, इन सब चीजों के अंदर राजस्थान अब बहुत आगे बढ़ चुका है। आज हम लोग गुड सेंस के अंदर सेकंड नंबर के ऊपर आ चुके हैं राजस्थान, जो पहले 26-27 नंबर पर आता था। आज मैं समझती हूँ कि हमारे डिपार्टमेंट के, मैं आप लोगों को बताना चाहूंगी कि राजस्थान की गवर्नमेंट हमारे चीफ मिनिस्टर साहब के गाइडेंस के अंदर वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट के लिए बहुत से ऐसे कार्य कर रही है जो अपने आप में माइलस्टोन बनेंगे इन फ्यूचर। हम लोगों ने आई एम शक्ति एक योजना, एक प्लान चलाया है, उसके तहत हम लोग वुमेन एम्पावरमेंट को बढ़ा रहे हैं। हम लोग बिजनेस के लिए सब्सिडाइज लोन दे रहे हैं। हम लोग स्कूल, कोविड की वजह से बहुत ऐसे पुअर फैमिलीज थी जिन्होंने अपनी बेटियों को स्कूल कॉलेज से बाहर निकाल लिया था ड्यू टू फाइनेंस रीजन, कि हमारे पास पैसा नहीं है, हम लोग आप लोगों को स्कूल कॉलेज में कंटिन्यू नहीं कर सकते। ऐसी स्थिति के अंदर हमने ड्रॉप आउट बच्चियों के लिए वापस एजुकेशन से जोड़ने की स्कीम चलाई, और मुझे बहुत खुशी है इस बात की कि 1,36,000 गर्ल्स को हम लोग ड्रॉप आउट बच्चियों को वापस स्कूल और कॉलेजेस के अंदर वापस उनको एडमिशन दिला चुके हैं, उनको वापस एजुकेशन सिस्टम से जोड़ चुके हैं। और जो मैं इंडस्ट्री की बात कर रही थी कि सब्सिडाइज लोन हमारा 1 करोड़ तक का हम लोग 25% सब्सिडी महिलाओं को, लेडीज को देते हैं उनके इंडस्ट्री डेवलप करने के लिए। उसमें आज लगभग 600 लेडीज इसमें हमारी आ चुकी हैं जिनको हम लोगों ने लोन दिया है सब्सिडाइज, और 28 करोड़ का लोन हमने पिछले वर्ष लास्ट ईयर हमने महिलाओं को यहाँ पे सैंक्शन किया। तो मैं समझती हूँ कि छोटी छोटी स्मॉल स्केल इंडस्ट्री डेवलप करके कहीं ना कहीं लेडीज अपने मेन प्लेटफॉर्म में आएंगी, अपने फैमिली के लिए स्ट्रेंथनिंग करेंगी और कहीं करने कहीं खुद का भी एक ब्रांड बनाने के अंदर उनको सहायता मिलेगी। हम लोग आज जमाना कंप्यूटर का है, हर हाथ में मोबाइल है, हर आदमी लैपटॉप कंप्यूटर लेके घूमता है। ऐसी स्थिति के अंदर वो बच्चियां, क्योंकि राजस्थान जो है 80% रूरल बैकग्राउंड का प्रदेश है, और यहाँ पर हम लोग ने प्रयास किया कि हम कंप्यूटर के अंदर एडवांस कोर्स, बेसिक कोर्स की एजुकेशन हम करा पाए। मुझे खुशी है कि 1,45,000 गर्ल्स को हमने कंप्यूटर की एजुकेशन लास्ट ईयर कोविड के दौरान कंप्यूटर की बेसिक और एडवांस एजुकेशन से हमने उनको जोड़ा। आज लगभग 1,45,000 गर्ल्स और लेडीज हमारी कंप्यूटर का बेसिक और एडवांस कोर्स कर चुकी हैं, और वो बेसिक और एडवांस कोर्स करने की वजह से कहीं ना कहीं उनको जॉब भी मिल रही है। क्योंकि आजकल हर जगह सबसे पहले पूछते हैं कि आपको कंप्यूटर आता है कि नहीं आता, आप कंप्यूटर पे काम कर पाएंगे कि नहीं कर पाएंगे। तो हमने उनको बेसिक कोर्स भी सिखाया, एडवांस कोर्स भी सिखाया, जिससे वो खुद का अपना एम्प्लॉयमेंट कर पाए, खुद अपनी जॉब कर पाए और अपनी एक रेस्पेक्ट की जिंदगी को किस तरह से जी पाए। इन सब चीजों के बारे में हमने सोचा। और राजस्थान के अंदर, क्योंकि मैंने आपको कहा कि हमारा पहले बहुत रूढ़िवादी प्रदेश था, हमारी पुरानी परंपराओं को बहुत ज्यादा माना जाता था। अगर घर के अंदर बेटे ने जन्म ले लिया तो दूसरी जो सेकंड संतान, सेकंड चाइल्ड, अगर किसी लेडी को वो प्रेग्नेंट है तो उसकी बिल्कुल केयरलेस हो जाते हैं कि अब ठीक है बेटा हो चुका हमारे तो पहला, और अब दूसरे बच्चे के लिए हमें कोई जरूरत नहीं, हो जाए तो ठीक है जैसा भी होएगा। सीएम साहब ने इंदिरा गांधी मातृत्व पोषण योजना के तहत सेकेंड संतान के प्रेगनेंसी के दौरान हम लोग 6,000 रुपीज उसके न्यूट्रिशन के लिए यहाँ पे दे रहे हैं, जिससे जच्चा बच्चा स्वस्थ हो, आने वाला बच्चा भी स्वस्थ हो, और माँ 9 महीने के दौरान अपने खाने पीने का ध्यान ढंग से रख पाए, जिससे जो हमारी शिशु मृत्यु दर और मातृ मृत्यु दर IIM और ये जो हो रही है, इनके ऊपर किस तरह से हम लोग रोकथाम लगा पाए और हमारा आने वाले फ्यूचर के जो चाइल्ड हैं, जो बच्चे हैं, वो किस तरह से हेल्दी हो पाए। ये बहुत माइन्यूट चीजें हैं जिनके बारे में जल्दी से कोई नहीं सोच पाता, लेकिन हम लोगों ने प्लान बनाया और मुझे लगता है कि आने वाले फ्यूचर में राजस्थान के बच्चे जो 80% हमारे रूरल बैकग्राउंड से बिलोंग करते हैं, दे विल बी ए हेल्दी बेबी, दे विल बी ए गुड बेबी, और वो हमारे राजस्थान के फ्यूचर के लिए आगे बढ़ पाए। मुझे इस प्लेटफॉर्म पे ये बताते हुए भी बहुत खुशी है कि हमारी एक नई इनोवेशन स्कीम उड़ान योजना हम लोगों ने लॉन्च की अभी 2 महीने पहले, और उस उड़ान योजना के अंदर फ्री सैनिटरी नैपकिन 1 करोड़ 20 लाख लेडीज को अंडर एज 10 to 45 की जो एज है उनको हम लोग फ्री सैनिटरी नैपकिन एवरी मंथ देंगे। क्योंकि मेंस्ट्रुअल हाइजीन के अनहाइजीन की वजह से आजकल इतनी तरह की बीमारियां हो रही हैं, कैंसर जैसी बीमारी से महिलाएं ग्रसित होती हैं, और बचपन में ही उनको मेंस्ट्रुअल अनहाइजीन की वजह से ऐसी गंभीर बीमारियां हो जाती हैं जो ना तो वो अपने पेरेंट्स से कह पाती, ना किसी डॉक्टर के पास जाती हैं, क्योंकि उनकी उम्र 10-15 साल होती है। तो ऐसी स्थिति को सोचते हुए राजस्थान के अंदर अभी भी माहवारी के दौरान जो पीरियड्स आते हैं उसके दौरान पुराने गंदे कपड़ों को इस्तेमाल किया जाता था। हम लोगों ने इसके बारे में सोचा और आज फ्री सैनिटरी नैपकिन देने की स्कीम 1 करोड़ 20 लाख लेडीज को हम लोग देंगे। मैं समझती हूँ कि राजस्थान में महिलाओं की स्वास्थ्य को, हेल्थ को लेके ये बहुत बड़ा कदम होगा। ये माइलस्टोन हमारे सरकार का है। मुझे लगता है कि इस माइलस्टोन की वजह से आने वाले समय में जो महिलाओं के अंदर बहुत ही गंभीर बीमारियां इस दौरान होती थी, उन डिजीज को हम लोग किसी तरह से कंट्रोल कर पाएंगे, और एक हेल्दी लेडी, एक हेल्दी गर्ल की जो हमारी भावना है उसको हम लोग आगे बढ़ा पाएंगे। मैं क्योंकि आप लोग बहुत ही दूर दराज से आए हुए हैं, इंटरनेशनल लेवल पे इस फेस्टिवल को ज्वाइन करने आए हैं। मैं समझती हूँ कि आप लोगों की बहुत सी फीलिंग्स ऐसे जुड़ी हुई हैं इस जेएलएफ से, बहुत सी बातें आप लोगों के दिल में हैं जो आप एक दूसरे से शेयर करना चाहते हैं। बिहाफ ऑफ गवर्नमेंट ऑफ राजस्थान में आप लोगों को एश्योर करना चाहती हूँ कि वी विल बी विद यू, वी आर विद यू, वी वॉज विद यू। और हम हर प्लेटफॉर्म पे स्टेट गवर्नमेंट आप लोगों के साथ में सहयोग करेगी, हेल्प करेगी, जिस भी स्तर पे आप लोगों को, जिस लेवल पे आप लोगों को हमारी हेल्प की आवश्यकता है। हमारे डिपार्टमेंट की प्रिंसिपल सेक्रेटरी मिसेस श्रेया गुहा हमारे बीच में बैठी हुई है। शी इज वेरी गुड ऑफिसर और मैं उम्मीद करूंगी कि आप सब लोग श्रेया जी से लगातार संपर्क में रहें, उनसे चर्चा करते रहें। इस वे डिपार्टमेंट वुमेन एंड WCD डिपार्टमेंट के माध्यम से जो भी कोई जेएलएफ के लिए कुछ भी हम लोग सहयोग दे पाए, आपकी मदद कर पाए या फिर आपको कोई भी नया वे दे पाए, तो हम लोगों के लिए बहुत बड़ा ऑनर होगा हमारे डिपार्टमेंट के लिए। इसलिए मैं आज जो आप लोगों ने मुझे यहाँ पे बुला के अपनी बात कहने का मौका दिया और एक बहुत ही सुंदर और ऐतिहासिक प्रोग्राम को अपनी आंखों से देख के मैं इसकी एक तरह से आई विटनेस हो गई। और मैं समझती हूँ कि जो आज मैंने जेएलएफ का रूप देखा है, अनफॉर्चुनेट मैं पहले कभी आ नहीं पाई, लेकिन आज जो मैंने रूप देखा है वो मेरी आंखों से कभी भी ओझल नहीं हो सकता। हमेशा मेरी फीलिंग्स में, मेरी यादों में जेएलएफ रहेगा। और मैं उम्मीद करूंगी कि बार बार आप लोग यहाँ पर आए, आप लोगों को अच्छी फैसिलिटीज मिले, राजस्थान आपको होस्ट करे और हम लोग जो भी आपकी सहायता कर पाए इस प्रोग्राम के आयोजन में वो जरूर हम लोग करेंगे। मैं आपका सारे ऑर्गेनाइजर्स को बहुत बहुत थैंक्स कहना चाहूंगी और उम्मीद करूंगी कि ये एक तरह से माइलस्टोन बन के जेएलएफ 2022 निकले। और 2 साल का जो हमारी कमी रही है कि कोविड के दौरान हम लोगों ने जेएलएफ नहीं कर पाए क्योंकि सोशल डिस्टेंसिंग का मसला इतना ज्यादा था, बीमारी इतनी हाइप पे आई हुई थी कि हम लोग सब एक दूसरे से डरे हुए थे। तो उन सब चीजों को दूर करते हुए ईश्वर ने एक बार दोबारा हम सब लोगों को गेट टुगेदर करने का, मिलने का, एक दूसरे की बातों को समझने का, अपने अपने थॉट्स को शेयर करने का जो मौका जेएलएफ के माध्यम से दिया है, ये हम सब लोगों के लिए बहुत अच्छा रहेगा। आपने मुझे यहाँ पे बुलाया उसके लिए बहुत बहुत थैंक यू। थैंक यू ऑल ऑफ यू।
Thank you, Mamta ji, Honorable Minister of Department of Women and Child, Government of Rajasthan. You all will be very happy that along with you, we have like in thousands and thousands viewers who are watching us online. So we won't delay it any further. I hand over to Malashri Lal for the session, The Sacred Feminine.
It's been a very inspiring talk by Honorable Minister, and I want to take some of her ideas forward. In India, we are very fortunate to have a living mythology, and the sacred feminine is all around us. We celebrate festivals, we pay homage to Devi in her many appearances, and in many places around us, we meet bhakts, we see bhakti, we see manifestations of a practiced religion and faith. My two speakers here are eminently qualified to speak in detail on the aspect of the feminine. I'll first invite Alka Pande to elaborate on her book on Shakti. We all hear about the story of Sati and how she was humiliated because her husband was not invited to a yajna, and how Shiv was so angry about the self-immolation of Sati that he carried her body on his back and took on the Rudra Tandav, which was to destroy the world. It was, of course, Vishnu who was able to put a stop to it, and Sati's body parts fell across a sacred geography of the country. So over to you, Alka, to take forward the findings of your research on the Shakti Peethas.
Sarvamangal Mangalye Shive Sarvarth Sarthike Sharne Trambike Gauri Narayane Namustude. Salutations to you, O Narayani, who is the auspiciousness in all the auspicious, auspiciousness herself, complete with all the auspicious attributes, and who fulfills the objectives of the devotees. She who is the giver of refuge with 3 eyes and a shining face, salutations to you, O Narayani. So I just wanted to begin with that shlok because Shakti is everywhere. It's here, it's there, it's everywhere. It's in you, it's in me. Thank you, Mala, for the lovely introduction. I'm delighted to have Arundhati on the panel. She's a poet and she will look at the energies and the manifestations of energies through her own personal devotion. For me, the book is actually my own journey with my upbringing. I come from a family of Shaks. We are from Uttarakhand, and my father is a great worshipper of the Devi. In the days past, हमारे घर में बलि चढ़ती थी, and it may sound very, quite cannibalistic in a way, but बहुत साल पहले जब बलि चढ़ती थी, nobody in the house could have meat without the blood of the bali on their tongue. So we have various manifestations of Devi. Devi as a nurturer, Devi as Kali with her tongue dripping blood. But when I started this particular journey and started unraveling the worship that I had seen in my house, from the Navratri pujas to the chanting of the Chandi part, which is Kanthasth for my father. You go to convent schools, you start speaking English, and somewhere along the line there is a dilution. But as you grow older, it's a very strange thing, Mala. You go back to your roots, you go back to your childhood. And then when I was commissioned to do this book on Shakti, I thought, what could be better than doing the Shakti Peethas? Because they are the sacred geography. And I'll just take 2 minutes to just read from my book, just the 2 paragraphs, which will really lay out the work. When we think of Shakti, the first thought and image that comes to mind is the all-powerful Durga astride her tiger. She's seated comfortably on the dangerous beast, signaling to everyone that the might of the tiger is completely under her control. Yet another potent image is that of Kali, her tongue coated with fresh blood, naked, her hair unbound, standing on top of an inert primordial Shiva, wearing a garland of skulls that fall on her voluptuous breasts. The Devi Sahasranam is a living text of the number of avatars or forms of Shakti that have been transformed into, and which are more than 1,001. Sifting through the layers of myths, I would like to clear the trajectory I'm creating in my personal journey to the affirmation of the feminine power of Shakti, where she emerged from, how Sati becomes one of her manifestations in a sagun or form, and how as Sati, she spreads her area of power and strength in her 51 dwellings. I go back to the very origins. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Samsita. Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namah. To the goddess who dwells within all beings in the form of intellect, I bow down again and again and again.
How beautiful. Thank you, Alka. I'll turn to Arundhati Subramaniam now. Whereas Alka is looking into the stories of the past and how they are manifested in today's practice, you have this beautiful book called Women Who Wear Only Themselves. And this is about women today who are seekers. In some ways, one can even call them saints, but they're not institution builders. They're ordinary women who have taken the path of seeking the divine. And you, in your own way, have also been a seeker of the divine and of poetry. And I've read your wonderful, moving biography of Sadhguru too. So how do you place your work in the context of the sacred feminine?
Thank you. Can I be heard? Yes? Thank you, Mala. That's an interesting question, and it's wonderful to have started with this invocation to Devi by Alka. I've been a spiritual seeker, I think, for as long as I can remember, Mala. Perhaps not in a way that I ever defined to myself. In many ways, a closet seeker for a long time. And then one day, one could be in the closet no longer. It's a long story, but I'm not going to dwell on it at any length. What I would like to say is that for years, I spent my time thirstily reading the literature of mystics. And I dived deep into all of it, from Ramana Maharishi to Ramakrishna Paramahansa, from Nisargadatta Maharaj to Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, and much more. And I was nourished and I was grateful, as I continue to be. I even found my own guru, as Mala mentioned. But what remained was a particular thirst for the voices of women. And it just struck me that I hadn't heard enough of those. I hadn't heard enough of the voices of women on this journey, particularly contemporary women. I remember being struck by this every time I read any account of the religious history of this subcontinent. And I would come across the names of male religious reformers, scriptural scholars, institution builders. The women were shadowy presences always. And so I looked back on my own life and I realized that in the past decade, much of which I've spent in the southern part of India, I had actually been very deeply grateful to conversations with women. And I realized it was time in some way to bring those together. And so the four women in this book are crazily diverse. One is in a contemplative tradition, the other is in the ecstatic tradition. One is a tantric, one is a bhakta, one is a devotee, one is an intellectual. One is a monk, the other wears blue jeans, and the third wears no clothes at all. That's how diverse they are. And each one of them on a path so singular, so idiosyncratic, so compelling, that I just felt grateful to be around as a listener. And this book was put together in the faith that there will be perhaps other listeners out there as well who would want to tune in to these conversations. The idea is not to advocate any path or denounce any path. The idea is just to be present as a listener. And for me, that was the most gratifying experience of all.
To take that idea forward, the interest in the divine feminine has also reflected on the body of the woman. And that fascinates me because somewhere when we talk of Devi, and particularly the Shakti Peethas, which is based on the body parts of Sati, we are worshipping the female body. When we look at the violence against the woman today in ordinary lives, and Madam Minister also mentioned it, that is a violence against the body of the woman and because of the body of the woman. So where do we locate this gap between the worshipful attitude towards the female body and the violent, abusive attitude towards the female body? So both of you, in your research, how do you reflect on the body of the woman, the sharira, as Alka uses that in her essay? This sharir, when does it become sacred when does it become subject to abuse? Alka first. Okay.
Well, I am going to, talk from my practice as an art historian and as a person who studied the morphology, particularly of Ardhanarishwar, which was my doctoral work. And I like to use the word Sharira because it is a Saguna form of worship. And within our culture, we've always worshipped in the Saguna form, in the image of man. So when the Devi is being worshipped, I'm not talking of the Nirakar, I'm talking of the Saguna form. And when the Devi is being worshipped, she has the ideal form of the human body. The body becomes the sacred space in which resides the divine. But when you look at when you're talking of rage and molestations and attack on the female body, I somehow think it's also related to power, to balance. There's always been a very strong male trajectory, and there's been a very strong trajectory of, as Arundhati had mentioned, of the tantrics, where the woman is all powerful, and also the Shaks, who believe that Shiva without Shakti is a Shava. So when you look at the female body at one level, which I think all of us would agree, she's worshipped, it's divine, it's a supra body, it's a very sacred, very, very, powerful body. But what does one do when a person is not, I would say, refined in their sensibilities? You see today in Kamakhya that the body, the Lajja Gauri image is covered because of the gaze. And I think it has a lot to do with the gaze. Who is looking? How are you looking? How are you perceiving? So if the male gaze is very, it's a commodifying gaze, then the female body is looked at in a different way. But when the bhaks go and worship, when Adi Shankaracharya worships, and in his Saundarya Lahiri, he talks of the body of the Devi, he is talking of her luscious, pendulous breasts, but he's talking of it in a very, very, critical, theoretical, spiritual. There are so many things involved in that. So I think ultimately it becomes who is the worshipper, who is looking, and what is the gaze all about.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I'd also say more personally that when I began my spiritual journey, I had visions of becoming this wonderfully serene human being. That's what I hoped I would become. What I never realized is that any spiritual journey of any authenticity drops you first into your body. And that is the place that you absolutely cannot escape, as I discovered. And that's when I also realized this extraordinary legacy of the bhakti poets of this country, who reminded me again and again that we had a literary ancestry that told us that the body is not a barrier, but that the body is the very basis of the spiritual journey. And they told us this time and again. They were able to celebrate the body, but they were also able to see the body as a site of pain, as a site of the erotic, as a site of transformation. And whether it's Soirabai, who says she's a 14th century Dalit woman mystic of Maharashtra, whether it's she who says, if menstrual blood makes me impure, show me who wasn't born of that blood. Or whether it is Annamacharya, the male mystic of the 15th century, who adopts a female voice to speak of the spiritual journey, as many of the male mystics did. And when he adopts a female voice, he's able to say that God is not just my boss, he's also my slave. Because the intimacy of the relationship that is possible here now allows him to do that. So when I came to the women in this book, and I'd like to just very briefly mention the four of them, each of them inhabits the body differently. The very first woman is Annapurni Amma, who chooses to live much of the time naked. And when I went in to see her and saw her sitting resplendent, wearing her body almost casually, it struck me that this was another way of wearing the self. And in my conversation with her, at one point, she wore her body really like a lion. That's how I saw her. And at one point in the conversation, she told me, she says, the whole world calls me crazy. The whole world calls me promiscuous. And when I told my guru about that, he said to me, the whole world goes around chasing multiple priorities: wealth, family, career, success, what have you, health. But here you are, simply on a one-pointed journey of the spirit. Who here is truly promiscuous? I must say that when I actually stepped out of her little hermitage that day, that question rang in my ears. Who really is crazy here?
Thank you. Alka, to take some of these thoughts a little further, you have tracked the history, geography, and practices in the 51 Shakti Peethas, which, to my surprise, also included areas in Bangladesh, Tibet, Nepal, Pakistan, Sri Lanka. When it comes to the practice of the Devi Bhakti, how are these areas outside of India different than the ones that we know of, the active practice in Kamakhya and the Kali Mandir in Calcutta, for example?
That's a very interesting and a rather complicated question. In my head, it's just that this was a geography which was very much part of what I would in my head say pan-Indian. And these are areas where in our mythology, which is, received kind of wisdom through years, which is a cultural story, the body parts fell because to show the expanse of Shiva, of the Rudra Shiva dance, which was, he was in such sadness, sorrow of losing his beloved Parvati, who's part of him. Because if you look at the concept of Ardhanari Ishvara, Shiv and Shakti are part of one composite Sharira. So he felt the great loss in such a way. And when he was doing his dance and the body parts fell in these different areas, the sanctity of the divine form of Devi was absorbed in these different cultures. And I think in India, I don't call India a country, I really call it a continent, because there are so many different kind of manifestations, different regional variations. When I was doing the Shakti Peethas, I also see the prasad changing. The prasad which is given to Devi in West Bengal, Bangladesh, is a khichdi and payesh. Whereas if you go to the mountainous areas, it's meat and sweet, because these were the kinds of prasads that were given to the Devi. You go to South India, the prasad there changes. So therefore, the bhakti and the worship and the rituals of worship in these different regions are very much guided by the, the rituals, the food habits, the cultural content of the spaces where the body parts fell. So this is the way I would look at it.
It's very interesting because when Namita Gokhale and I were working on our book on Sita, and as we know, the Ramayana story is told in many cultures. You said the South Asian continent had the story passing through it. there were versions which had developed in Indonesia and the Philippines, which had very little to do with what the Ramayana means to us and what Sita means to us in India. And again, within India, you're completely right, there are micro practices which are different. So, Arundhati, I want to relate your poetry to the conversation that you had with the women. One of them is a practitioner of Nad Yoga, the sound. And I felt reading those chapters that you as a poet were very drawn to this idea of meter, rhythm, sound, prayer, shlokas, chanting, that whole range by which we express our religiosity. So you've also interspersed the chapters with your own poetry at times, poetry that relates to the story of the woman that you are interviewing. So how do you link the mysticism, the quest of those people, your quest as a seeker, and your interest in the sound of poetry?
You're right. There was an excitement, I think, in that particular conversation, because Bala Rishi is another yogini. For her, her guidance comes from the realm of primal sound. And that aspect of poetry excites me hugely. The timbre of the voice, the tone, rhythm, all of that. If I had to offer you a very short answer to this question, I'd say that many years ago, when I started out as a young poet, I was excited by metaphor, and I was excited by rhythm, and I was excited by the sensuousness of language, and all of that endures. What I had not prepared myself for were the silences that are also an integral part of poetry. So I had a particular experience that for me was a direct encounter, or that's how it seemed to me. It seemed to me like a direct encounter with the blank spaces on a page of poetry. That really is how it felt. And as I emerged from that experience, I realized that I needed to make my peace with those silences that are an integral part of a poem. So the poems that intersperse these essays are born of that respect for silences. They're also born of that respect for poetry itself as a form that cuts through. It cuts through the smog of doctrine and opinion and ideology and philosophy. It works with the language of suggestion, of clues. It offers you clues. It invites you to simply recognize what you already know. And I felt that that would be the right way to invite the reader into the realm of the mystic.
Thank you for that insight, Arundhati. Alka, my specific question this time is on the two Shakti Peethas that most of us are familiar with. The Kamakhya, which is the quiescent, beauteous, youthful aspect of the Devi, and the Kali Ghat, which has the angry, against evil aspect of the Devi. The physical appearances that we imagine of the Devi in both these sites is also very contrasted and very different. And through iconography too, you get a diversity which is absolutely startling. So how do you understand, interpret, accept for current relevance these two very different aspects of the Devi, both of whom are deeply revered and deeply worshipped?
These are really tough questions because there's such a difference between the philosophy and the actual interpretation and the way the worship is perceived. by people who are non-believers. So when you go to Kamakhya, you don't really see the yoni per se, because you have to go deep down into the deep cavernous place where there is a cleft of water, in which the icon is just a stone. It's a cleft, which is supposed to be the yoni. And you dip your hands there and you put that red water. So can you imagine men putting menstrual blood on their foreheads? But they do it in a metaphorical way when they go to the Kamakhya temple. When you talk of Kali Ghat, it's completely different. It's not so personal. It's not so dank. It's not so dark. It's not so mysterious. Because in Kamakhya, the Devi is not just only quiet and beautiful. She is virile, she's ferocious, she's a tantric goddess. There are the 10 Mahavidyas around the Kamakhya temple, and she can also be very fearsome. You see a lot of kinnars who go there. There is a whole festival of kinnars who go there. So in Kamakhya, also the Devi has all her forms. But when we go to Kali Ghat, the entire way of worshipping the Devi also becomes different, because over the years, you also see Dakshineshwara, which is where Aurobindo went, which is a different place. And Kali is very ferocious there. She's not so creative as she's ferocious, but I think in the temple in Kali Ghat, as you go today, and when I went even during COVID times, the Devi is perceived both by men and women as a very powerful icon. And what is interesting for me is that both in Kamakhya and in Kali Ghat, the men are completely subservient when they are worshipping her. So in the worship, there is no kind of, that rage, what you were talking about, or the way women are treated in today's world and the kind of problems she has to face. There, the men are completely subservient, even today, in today's time. So there's a huge polarity when you see the way, particularly the men behave in both these peethas.
Arundhati, I don't know if you're carrying any of your poetry with you. If you have your book with you, it would be wonderful as we come to the closing minutes of the session, if you could read one of your poems. Because the subject that we're talking about, the sacred feminine, it's very relevant in changing our thinking today, because the idea brings with it a kind of peace, prayer, compassion, and understanding of both men and women in society, and the sacred relationship, a relationship that is to be nurtured and that is to be seen as one of equality, as in the Ardhanarishwar image that Alka spoke about and has a brilliant book about. So I will request Arundhati Subramaniam to please read one of her poems from her book.
Since I did mention Annapurni Amma, the naked woman mystic, it feels right to read this particular poem to her. It's a poem called The Lover. The woman doesn't call herself a saint, just a lover of the saint, who's been dead 300 years. She doesn't see people on weekdays, but her master tells her we are safe. So she calls us in to where she sits, her body blazing in its nakedness, a crumpled afterthought, its tummy fold and breast sag and wild spiraling nipple reminding us that life is circles, crazy, looping, involuting, dazzling circles. She tells us the world calls her a whore. She told her master about it too, but he only said, the rest of the world serves many masters: family, money, lovers, bosses, fame, power, money, money, in endless carousels, the crazy autopilot of samsara. But you, love, think only of me. Who's the whore here? Outside the window, the sun is a red silk lampshade over a great soiled bedspread, ricocheting in the wind.
Thank you very much, Arundhati Subramaniam and Alka Pande, for this thoughtful, beautiful, and highly significant session when we begin to look at the woman again and we see her as the sacred feminine. Thank you also for a wonderful, attentive audience.
Thank you, Alka Pande, Arundhati Subramaniam, and Malashri Lal ji. Lovely session. Thank you so very much. Today at Jaipur Literature Festival, we are celebrating Norway Day. The Royal Norwegian Embassy is our country partner for the Jaipur Literature Festival.